Welcome to Damn Parenting. I'm Evie, your host, and I'm so glad you're joining me. Today's episode is a bit different. I recorded this conversation with Erica 6 months ago, during the dark, rainy winter evenings here in the Netherlands. At the time, I was receiving messages from mothers who felt isolated, overwhelmed, and lost. Many had moved here following their partner's new job or promotion, expecting a fulfilling new chapter. Instead, they found themselves navigating motherhood alone in a city that felt more like a maze than a village. They walked the same paths daily, faces obscured by scarves, shielding themselves from the relentless rain and the weight of solitude. They attended events and visited spaces in hopes of connection, only to leave feeling as alone as when they arrived. Visa restrictions, language barriers, and a challenging job market left them without paid employment opportunities, their identities seemingly reduced to the role of just a mother. But here's the truth. Being a mother is not just anything. It's an unpaid, mentally taxing, and exhausting role that holds immeasurable value. It's one of the greatest gifts we can offer our children, shaping the future of society and the world. I understand that this episode might not resonate with everyone, and that's perfectly okay. Life is diverse, and so are our experiences. However, I felt compelled to create this episode for those who might find solace and strength in Erica's words, for those who need to hear that their efforts are seen, valued, and impactful. For this episode, I stepped outside the Netherlands for the first time to interview someone whose name many of you will recognize. So without further ado, let's dive into this heartfelt conversation with Erica. Hi, Erica.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me. 2 books you've written. First was Being There, Why Prioritizing Motherhood in the First 3 Years Matters, and Chicken Little, The Sky Isn't Falling, The Raising Resilient Adolescents in the New Age of Anxiety. Both of them are very interesting books, but we're going to focus first on the first book because most of this podcast episode in the last year and a half have really focused on the, as they call them in the Netherlands, the Tropenjaren, the jungle years, which I always find an exceptional term for us. We're just going to dive into it because I guess in a way to round up the book, being present as much as possible in those 3 years can have a major impact on the future of your child's mental health. Why do you believe that the first 3 years of a child's life is so crucial for the emotional and cognitive development?
Well, it is the inconvenient truth. It's not my thinking or even my belief. It's research. So basically, neuroscience allows us to understand the brain better than ever before. And the first 3 years is what we call the first critical period of right or social emotional brain development. And so in that period, a lot's happening. Things like teaching children to regulate their emotions, buffering them from stress so they can manage more stress and adversity in the future, teaching them to read social cues. These are all experiences, and these are things you learn in the first 3 years from a primary attachment figure who's usually your mother. After 3 years, 85% of the right brain is developed, meaning internalizing things like the ability to cope with small amounts of stress or the ability to begin to regulate your emotions. Those aren't internalized till after 3 years. So when we literally throw our children into the swimming pool, there was this movement where you take infants, you just throw them in and, you don't care if they can't swim, if it's going to stress them out. That's sort of what we're doing to children. Instead of being sensitive about the critical nature and the importance that children in this first 3 years feel safe, feel secure, and trust their environment to provide them with a sense of safety and security.
It's one of those things, though, that you think in the first 3 years, you don't know how much you can impact them. And I think it always takes research. And most of the time, especially in those first few years, it's really hard to sit down and through exhausted brains and eyes trying to read those books. This is the reason why the podcast for me was to keep it succinct and have a conversation about how this is going. You focus specifically on the mother's presence. What impact is it that specifically the mother actually has on the child's brain development?
Well, mothers have a biological connection to infants that fathers do not. Even mothers who adopt babies, because that's often a question I'm asked, have a different kind of biological connection to infants because even though, and I know you're in Amsterdam, so I know in Northern Europe and around the world and in America too, there's this, mothers and fathers are exactly the same. Women and men are not different in any way. And it's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. I mean, men and women are equal in intelligence and they're equal in ambition and they're equal in so many ways, but they're different. So the term I would use is equal, but different. And so our differences in terms of nurturing behaviors connected to our hormones make us different in terms of nurturing young. So if you have a healthy mother, and I caveat this, I use a caveat, if the mother has been raised in an emotionally healthy environment and is emotionally healthy herself, then her instincts will kick in. And instincts are related to hormones. So when mothers give birth, breastfeed, and nurture their young, they produce a lot of oxytocin. Oxytocin is a love hormone, a neurotransmitter that increases the ability of mothers to attach to their babies, but also is responsible for a behavior which is sensitive, empathic nurturing. So it gives mothers the superpower to be able to soothe their infants and toddlers when they're in distress. Fathers produce oxytocin, but to a lesser degree. And when they do produce it, it comes from a different part of their brain. And it also has a different impact on their behavior. It makes fathers more playful, tactile stimulators of babies. That means tickling, physical play, roughhousing, encouraging them to explore and take risks. Now, that's important too, because that's the yin to the yang of mothers, right? So mothers are there to soothe babies when they're in distress or when they're hurt or when they're sad. And fathers are there to regulate things like aggression and anger and excitement. Mothers regulate sadness and fear and distress, right? So mothers and fathers are both important, but they're not the same in terms of the nurturing behaviors connected to their hormones. Also, fathers produce a lot of what we call vasopressin. It's a different hormone, a nurturing hormone, which is in mammals, which is more in males than females. Females produce it too, but when males produce it, it makes them protective, aggressive guardians of their families. It makes them protective and aggressive. There was a study done in the UK where mothers and fathers lay down side by side at night. When the baby cried in the middle of the night, the mother was vigilant to the baby's distress cries. The father slept through them. But when the leaves were rustling outside the window, the father woke up and the mother slept through it. So instinctually, evolutionarily, it's taken thousands of years to fine tune and hone our nurturing behaviors. And we can't just ignore them. And, there was a commercial when I was a little girl for Tootsie Pops. They're like lollipops with a Tootsie roll in the center. And it was like, how many licks does it take to get to the center of the Tootsie Pop? I love that commercial. How many generations does it take to kill maternal instincts? And I would say, who knew that you can actually destroy maternal instincts, which risks the survival of our species? Young people your age do not want to have babies. They do not see any value in nurturing another human being. And so how many generations? 3, maybe going on 4 is all it took to kill maternal instincts that have taken thousands of years. And the survival of our species depends upon.
Can I go back to the caveat you mentioned there at the start?
Yeah.
You said if people were raised in a healthy way. Can we discuss if they weren't? Because look, it's the modern world and we're in 21st century.
Yeah. So there's a rash of what we call attachment disorders. So I wrote this book, Being There, and the actual title of it, the working title, when you write a book, you have a working title and then they change the title. It's the way all the time. I'm on my 3rd book now that's coming out in a year, and they always change my titles. But the original title that I had in mind for nearly 2 decades when I was writing this book and doing the research was The Lost Instinct. That was what Being There was supposed to be called. So what does it mean to not have a healthy mother? So when you have a baby, it's a psychotic experience. What do I mean by that? You are carrying a living person in your body. They're moving like an alien. You can watch them move, and then they come out of your body in this bloody, traumatic, what could be a traumatic experience, right? So you could see it as traumatic and psychotic. You could literally say, this is a crazy experience. Or you could look at that experience and say, this was the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced. I love this baby. I can't leave this. So a lot of how the birth experience and pregnancy and breastfeeding is experienced by mothers has to do with how healthy their own mothers were. Whether their own mothers had very strong, loving, nurturing behaviors. There was a piece of research by a researcher named Michael Meany that said mammals that lick and groom their young produce other mammals that lick and groom their young. But mammals that don't lick and groom their young produce mammals that don't lick and groom their young. And that the ones who do lick and groom their young The young become more resilient to stress and are emotionally healthier than the ones who are not licked. Seems like a pretty simple thing to say, but it's a very powerful piece of research. If you can't lick and groom your young because of generations of generational expression of attachment disorders or depression or postpartum depression that was never treated or resentment, anger, absence, distraction, I could think of so many ways in which mothers can even be physically there and emotionally checked out, right? Because I always say you can be physically there and not be emotionally there, but you cannot be emotionally there if you're not physically there. That is a myth. Don't let anybody tell you that somehow magically you can be there emotionally in the first 3 years if you're not there physically. If you're not there physically, you are gone to that baby. That baby does not have object constancy. That means they have not internalized you till about 3 years of age to feel secure when you're not around. When you're not around, you are gone to them.
That's kind of rough.
Yeah.
You did speak about your book in chapter 3. What does it mean to be a present mother? You said you and your baby are involved in a dance of connection, space, attachment and separation, engagement and disengagement, rupture and repair.
Yes.
For me, that kind of really was speaking about all the different kinds of attachment theories, as it were.
Yeah.
You were saying we have you in the sling, but we don't have you in the sling. You know, that you could see us, but you can't see us. And it felt like such an amalgamation of everything that can actually happen.
Yes.
And it was quite intense.
So 50% of interactions with the baby are what we call misunderstandings or missteps. So even if you're a very emotionally present mother, you're going to have missteps. So this is where the term good enough mother came to be, you know, the idea that it's not about perfection. And it's not about like staring at your baby all day long. You know, it's about the majority of the time, which is why I say more is more, the majority of the time, catching the moment. If you have a sensitive baby, and sensitive babies are different than less sensitive babies. There are babies who are born more neurologically sensitive. They are more sensitive to your absence. They are more sensitive to noise. They are more sensitive to touch. They are more sensitive to stress. And so they found a marker, a genetic marker. It's called the short allele on the serotonin receptor, where babies are actually more sensitive to stress. If you have a sensitive baby, and you look away for a moment, that's enough to set that baby off. And you know when you have a sensitive baby, if you have more than one baby, I'll often ask people, raise your hand if you have a sensitive baby, because if you have more than one, you have something to compare it to. Like you might have your first baby might have lured you into some sense of complacency because they're sweet and easy and, you know, and don't cry a lot, you know. And then you have your second baby and cries all the time, can't be soothed, you know, likes to be touched, doesn't like to be touched, doesn't sleep much. You know, those are neurologically sensitive babies. Okay. If you have a neurologically sensitive baby, little things that you do can set that baby off. And so you could say, even just slight missteps. And I'm not talking about going to work for 10 hours a day, which is what mothers are doing. I mean, they're literally leaving these sensitive babies in daycare, institutional care, where these babies are lost. They're lost emotionally. And they develop aggression, ADHD, they develop all kinds of anxiety, depression. So those babies are lost. If you have a sensitive baby, you put them in daycare. Now they're not physically, nor are they emotionally in contact with you all day long. Those babies are lost. Now you can repair that. So what we say is the brain is plastic. It can grow and it can shrink. In the first 3 years, it's the most important period to be there for your baby. Now, it's not that the rest of their childhood isn't important, but that is the period of personality development. Call it, I don't know how it is in Amsterdam, whether the houses have like basements, like so that you pour the cement in. So like you have to have a foundation for it. You can't just put a house up on grass. You have to pour the foundation, because if you don't pour the foundation for the house, the first sign of a big storm or a hurricane, the house is going to blow down. And we're building houses, metaphorically, without foundations, because the first 3 years is the foundation for the house that keeps the house standing in a storm. But this idea of rupture and repair is Ed Tronick kind of coined a lot of that term, which is the idea that there are a lot of missteps with babies, but you can repair those missteps by taking responsibility and reflecting the baby's emotions and meeting the baby where they are emotionally, and physical affection and attunement after the fact. You can do a lot of repair with babies. And so you could say every moment that is ruptured, the quicker you get to it to repair, the better it is. If you get a hole in your sock, and you're going to darn it. Nobody darns socks anymore. Everybody just throws them away. I'm dating myself. But if you're going to darn a sock, your favorite pair of socks, you better get to that hole quickly, because if you don't, that hole grows bigger and then it's undarnable. That would be a metaphor.
You are famous for stating that you're not a big fan of daycare and institutional care in general. And that I think I read somewhere about how up to 3 anyway, a child is only parallel playing anyway. And it's building its resilience that way. I think you phrased it. So I think one of the ways you said it was most people say it's for the socialization of the child. And I think you argue on that, saying it's not about the socialization of the child. It's actually about the good of the parent. It's good for them. Can I challenge you then on that to kind of say, since you're now discussing rupture and repair, can we be saying that it is still okay to be using then childcare? In the Netherlands, we also have gasthouders, which is where a person will take them into their own home and they'll have only a few children specifically in their own home. So they're in a home environment, not a care facility. Do you think then that...
Yeah. So let's talk about socialization, because again, I think in the last 30 or 40 years, there have been these myths that have developed that have grown bigger. It's sort of like rumors, like in my day, there was a party game called Telephone, and you played it when you were a little kid. You'd whisper in someone's ear or something, and they would whisper and whisper. And by the time it got to the end of the line, it was a totally different thing. So socialization is not something kids do. They don't interact with one another until about 3. Until about 3, they do something called parallel play, which is that what they're really looking for is their secure primary attachment figure to interact with them. They're looking for one person to pay attention to them, to help them to regulate their emotions and to explain their experiences to them, to narrate. They're not needing socialization. That is an adult myth that's projected onto children. You may need socialization, which is fine as an adult, as a mother. You may need to get together with other mothers so you don't lose your friggin' mind. And that's fine. And we call those play groups. And I encourage play groups where mothers get together with their babies and the babies do parallel play. But essentially the mothers can say, what about those diapers? And have you tried, pumpkin? Is pumpkin an allergic food? The kind of thing where mothers meet each other, because it used to be that a woman named Anita Diamant wrote a book called The Red Tent, a biblical story. I think it was of one of Isaac's daughters, or Jacob's daughter. I don't remember who in the Bible, one of the daughters that's never talked about. The women are never talked about, right? So the idea was that women lived in tents. They lived with other women. And they raised their children together, like kind of communes, but not communes where you left your children, but communes where you had company. They raised them with extended family. They were cousins, they were sisters, they were aunts, they were grandmothers. Now we raise children in the modern world in isolation. It's a big problem. So when you form a play group, you're creating a community. Because often people are away from their families now, because everybody moved to cities and away from their families, which is also not a great thing for families and not a great thing for children, but that's the way it is. So the idea is that if you form these play groups where you get together with mothers and babies, you now are not alone, and your babies are not really interacting with one another until they're about 3, but it's a way to see other mothers, right? And your baby is still primarily with you. And therefore, when they need you and they're in distress, you say to the mother, I'm sorry, I can't talk right now. I have to take care of my baby, right? That's how it works. I advocate for play groups. What I don't advocate for is drop-off daycare, because now you're removing the source of security to a baby who relies on that person for every inch of their feeling of safety in the world, right? So there's a big difference between dropping a child off like a sack of potatoes with strangers or transient daycare workers, or even the next door neighbor who may have 3 or 4 children, who is not going to be able to give your child that kind of individual attention, right? Sure, if you had to use care, then having someone who you know very, very well, like your neighbor who's like an aunt, like extended family, who has two other children, certainly that's better than putting a child in institutional care, because you know that woman, she's like family to you. Your child is going to know that woman, run next door and say, I'm going to go get an ice cream cone from Auntie Mary. That is far better than institutional care. But still, you have to be careful because the numbers speak for themselves. A child under the age of 3. So technically, a child should have a 1-to-1 connection for the first year, 1-to-1. That's never going to happen in daycare or in Auntie Mary's daycare. Now, Auntie Mary could be your babysitter, and it could happen. You could pay Auntie Mary. They have in Finland, they have stipends. They give you $14,000 a year, and you can give it to whoever you want. You can give it to Auntie Mary, and Auntie Mary can help you with your baby, right? 1-to-1 in the first year. For the next 2 years, no more than 3-to-1. Now, Auntie Mary can't afford 3-to-1. She's probably going to take 5 children in. Institutional care in Sweden is supposed to be 8-to-1 at 14 months, but it's really more like 12-to-1. So I go to Sweden to talk. There's always daycare workers that are sick and absent because can you imagine taking care of 8 children under the age of 3? You'd end up pulling your hair out, losing your mind, and getting sick all the time. And that's what happens. So there's no consistency. There's a transience of caregivers. And the children are literally in Sweden, 12 children to 1 caregiver at a time when the person that's with them is supposed to be regulating their emotions from moment to moment. How's that going to happen?
In the Netherlands, a lot of the people that have moved here, they're coming to a place that they don't have family, they don't have friends. They're literally starting from scratch. So for those of us that have arrived here, we are dependent on daycare because we don't have any other option. And it's another whole episode discussing the daycare's situation, the huishouders, the child, the nannies. I mean, it's understaffed here is the only way to put it. There was consistency.
Now, what are you calling daycare? How old?
They are, I think they started, 2 or 3 months until 4. When in the Netherlands at 4 years of age, you go to school the next day.
Okay. So in America, daycare is under 3. Anything over 3 is called preschool. That's why I'm asking. Okay.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted to make sure we were on the same page. So there are ways to overcome the situation you mentioned. And these are the suggestions I have for the mothers who are listening. If you're moving to a new place and you know no one, you know the expression, if you can't get invited to a party, throw your own party. So when you move to a new place, ask women in the neighborhood if anybody is interested in forming a cooperative. A cooperative is 1 or 2 or 3 mothers, probably no more than that, because you don't want to raise the numbers, who take turns watching each other's children. And now you have a pride of lionesses. So if you can't take care of your child yourself, the best is what we call kinship bonds. A grandmother, an aunt, a sister, like one of my kids was in preschool. There was a mother who was from Colombia, and she had her sister come over and be the babysitter. She paid her sister. She got her, they lived with her. And her sister stayed for a few years and took care of the children because the mother had a very intense job and was the main bread earner or whatever. That was a great situation. The aunt was living in the home, the way it used to be. If you can't do that, then the next best thing is to hire a single surrogate caregiver, a babysitter, a nanny. But a lot of people can't afford that. So the next best thing would be to hire 1 babysitter for 2 families. Now you can afford it. Now it's almost the price of daycare. Sometimes daycare is more expensive and not as good. So now you're paying 1 babysitter and 2 families, and that babysitter is probably still not taking care of more than 3 children, right? And then the next best option is to form a cooperative of lionesses who watch each other's children, who are invested. Friends. You form a group of women who become your friends, and you say, I'll watch your baby with my baby Tuesdays and Thursdays, and you watch my baby with your baby on Mondays and Wednesdays. And that way they stay in one of our homes. We trust each other. We know we're going to do a good job because we know each other. Form a cooperative. That would be far better than daycare, which is anonymous, transient, inconsistent, poor care in general. I can't go on enough about the research that daycare is bad for children, but it is truly, truly bad for children. There are so many good options. People just don't know them. So, why do I run around the world, blah, blah, blahing about this? Because there are so many good options that people just don't know about.
And that's true. And entering into the Netherlands, we have a very different system here. So it takes a lot of people trying to figure out, trying to take a nanny, trying to get an au pair in. And there's laws and regulations about that as well. It's a very overwhelming experience when people arrive here and have family or are starting their family. So that's some very interesting points. And I actually do know of some people trying to do what you were just mentioning about trying to pair up, trying to create this tribe, as it were.
Tribal. That's right.
Yeah.
The red tent. You create your own. If you don't have a red tent, you create a red tent.
It's really interesting because it is indeed the whole emphasis here for our international community is the fact that most people arrive here, they don't know anyone. I am literally the emergency number of some people because they're like, you're the only international person I know. Can I put you as my emergency number? And these aren't my family. It's just the fact that this is the state that many of us are here. We really don't know people and we're trying to have our lives, and it's not a very easy way to start to build up your tribe and invest in it.
You know how they send, in the old days, they would send an advance scout ahead, someone who would scout out a good campground and make sure there was no danger. And so the idea is if you move to a new place, you have to get there before, like the idea of moving and working. If you have to work, don't move there and work. Scout it out, create a community, spend a couple of months creating a community. Tell your job, I'm going to start, but I need a couple months to get an apartment, create a community, find childcare. But the idea is that you need to scout it out and you need to find your people. And you have to imagine that if it's a trend in Amsterdam that people move there and then just have no resources, that there's even a possibility for a women's network there that someone who's listening to this should probably organize. There's an organization called Big Ocean Women, which I love, out of Salt Lake City. My friend Caroline Allen started it. But basically, the idea was to bring women together to support one another who are mothering from different backgrounds. And there's an opportunity there, I guess, in Amsterdam to create a support network for women or a board, an online board where they can create communities and support one another with childcare.
Can you actually provide us any practical strategies then for moms to bond with their children and to build that trust during infancy and toddlerhood?
So skin to skin contact, breastfeeding, sleeping with your baby, carrying, wearing your baby, slings, and all these different ways now that mothers wear their babies on the front and then they wear them on the back. So there's a researcher who actually is from the Netherlands. Her name is Judy Nesman. She said to me when I interviewed her, babies in other parts of the world don't cry as much as babies in the West, because babies in the West are forced to be separate from their mothers too early. And so you create distress. You send these little fragile, neurologically fragile infants' brains into states of distress before they can handle that distress. Yoga teachers say you carry stress in your cells. It begins in infancy. They hold it in their bodies, these babies, not just in their psyches. So when you carry a baby, I just went to Australia to speak at a big conference, and then I went and traveled a little. And, Australia is somewhere there's a line between placental animals and marsupial animals, where every mammal in Australia is a marsupial animal. They carry their babies in their pouches. I've always thought that human beings, there's a lot of theories that say that human beings give birth to babies about 9 months or a year too early. And that the reason we do it is that our birth canal got so small because we stood upright. If you read the book Sapiens, it talks about that. But also the heads got too big of our babies, so we wouldn't have been able to, would have killed us to grow their heads and their bodies bigger. So they would kill the host. So we started giving birth earlier than our babies were actually prepared to be out in the world at that point. And so you could say that we probably should be more like marsupials. And so the carrying of the baby makes you more like a marsupial. And those babies don't cry because the transition from being in the womb to being out in the world is not so harsh for those babies. There's a transition where the babies are skin to skin and they can hear their mother's heartbeats and they can feel the warmth of their mother's skin and they can hear the soothing tone of their mother's voice and their mother's breath. And so that is like the best mindfulness training in the world. Everybody's into mindfulness training. You know why everybody's into mindfulness training? Because everybody was basically forced before they were actually ready out into a very stressful and scary world. We never needed mindfulness training. This is all new, and it's because your generation and the generation before you were raised in such a way that you were forced to be defensively independent before your little bodies and minds could actually handle it. So what do? You wear your baby, you sleep with your baby in the beginning, you spend as much time with your baby so you can regulate their emotions, and you breastfeed, because breastfeeding is still the best.
That does lead me on to, I think, probably my final question. I feel like a lot of people who've moved here because of usually job promotions, job chances, they've had to give up their career for their partner or whatever it might be. It's very tough that you're competing with the societal pressure of, I need to do this, or this is expected of me,
and that's an oxytocin killer. So oxytocin and cortisol are inversely connected. It means that the higher the cortisol, the lower the oxytocin.
And that's quite prevalent, I think, in many of the people living in Amsterdam, trying to either find a house, trying to find daycare, trying to figure out the school. So I'd love to wrap this up. We'll ask, how do you actually suggest a mother can cope with the societal pressures and expectations about how she should be parenting these days in these early years, especially being a parent in the foreign country, which provides insights where we get it from other cultures. Like you spoke about baby carriers, for example. I mean, that's very normal here. But share, like, it's totally normal. But I've spoken to many mothers who have said when they go home, their friends and family are like, you do what? What is this? You're crazy, and there's a lot of pressure there that you're trying to justify it, where we come here, we get educated with new ways or new options that we have available to us. So is there any words of empowerment that you might be able to share?
Well, I mean, you asked two questions. One, I'm going to answer the first one first, which was that you need to find your people wherever you are. You need to find a support system wherever you are. So if you live in Amsterdam, again, if you don't have a party you can go to, you make your own party. And there are many ways by putting on the internet, on social media, that you're looking for other moms who are interested in raising their children with healthy attachment, secure attachment, and you wear your baby and you sleep with your baby and you believe in breastfeeding. And is there anybody out there like me? And you say, would you like to form a group, a support group, a play group? And that's how you find your people. The internet is got so many problems. It's so problematic. Social media is so problematic. And yet this is a good use for it, right? There are some good uses. It can be used to be a community organizer. So you got to find your people wherever you are. And when you go home, it's important that you stay connected to the people who support you. If your own family of origin is not supportive, you need to hold on to the people that are, meaning you have to have them on speed dial. If you're going to go home and visit your mother and your mother was a narcissist and not only didn't wear you and didn't sleep with you, but barely acknowledged you as a separate person. Okay, you need to have your group on speed dial so you can call and say, okay, I'm going home for the holidays, but this is going to be rough. They got your back, right? You need to have a support system. Hopefully your spouse is your support system, but believe me, I've heard plenty of women who have come to me and said, my spouse is part of the problem. My parents are part of the problem. My friends are part of the problem. I'm like, okay, you can't divorce your spouse. Well, you could divorce your spouse, but you can't divorce your spouse right now. And you can't divorce your mother, but you can divorce your friends, or you can distance yourself from them and find some new friends, because friends you're not born into. You have a choice, and you need to find your people. Wherever we are in life, we need to find people like us. That's what makes us feel supported, makes us feel whole. So when you have a baby, that a lot happens to you that divides women. It's true. You might be very close to a woman as a single woman or as a married woman without children, and they're married without children. And then you both have babies. And suddenly the parenting styles between you and that other mother are so very different. And that is a friendship killer. Because if you can't respect or feel respected by another mother, it's not the basis of a good friendship. So you need to find mothers that you respect and who respect you. That would be my best advice.
And I love it. Erica Komisar, thank you again so much for joining us. I hope this episode has been a real empowering place for some moms out there. And now that they know your name, they'll know your book, that they can reach out, and also that they can use your tips. And it is such a great idea. Just label it and just say, this is who I am. Let's do this together, because it does take a village.
It does.
Erica Komisar, thank you again so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.